Tucker Carlson, for some reason, decided to host Nick Fuentes. This is the Christian nationalist, white supremacist, far-right podcaster who has denied the Holocaust, pushed anti-Semitic views, like you name it. This is pretty much as extreme as it's going to get in the podcasting world. Tucker Carlson decides to host him on his show this week after what had been a bit of a MAGA civil war, a lot of bad-mouthing one another, a lot of talk about the other being, ridiculous and terrible and all that. And now suddenly they're making nice. Tucker apologizes to him on his show, really offers like this fig leaf that has sort of come out of nowhere. Did you see this episode, Oliver? What do you think?
I watched a decent chunk of it, and I think this is like really fitting for Tucker Carlson because he has for a long time been the guy who brings on these really radical fringe figures and kind of pulls them into the mainstream. And I remember when he was at Fox, he was the first person to interview Marjorie Taylor Greene when she was sort of outcast from the conservative media sphere. She was considered as someone just even too extreme for, this is remarkable to think about now in 2025, but she was considered too extreme for Fox News, and she was not being invited on these shows. And Tucker Carlson was the one that broke that ice, I guess, and brought her on the show. And over the years, I think he's done he's continued to pull these people from the fringes and get them into the mainstream, acting like a bridge. And it's almost like he relishes, I think, to some extent in the backlash he gets from platforming these people. And as he to get that high, he almost has to go more extreme every single time. And so I guess this was this was the final place to go, which was platforming a white nationalist and giving him this really chummy interview.
But why would he? I mean, I get that he wants to go even more, I guess, extreme, grow his audience even more, right? Like Nick Fuentes has been the subject recently of like New York Times profiles about how he has this really big audience of young men in the MAGAverse. And there's probably some good overlap in audience between both Nick and Tucker. But I think for me, what's that?
You think that there's a good audience overlap?
Yeah, well, I think there's a large overlap between the two, right? Who are listening to both and probably get a kick out of the fact that like they had been attacking one another, criticizing one another as gay, and all the like epithets that are like cool among like 20-year-old MAGA types. But I don't know what Tucker gets out of this. Is it just purely the short-term gain of more audience, more views, keeping people interested in his show, but not caring really about the ramification of it? Or maybe this is more of an even more deeper, sinister embrace of more even extreme values on the far right that Tucker is sort of wading into.
Well, I think they do obviously share quite a bit in common. I mean, Tucker himself is effectively a white nationalist now, and has trafficked in a lot of anti-immigrant views for some time. And that's what Nick Fuentes, that's what he does. So there is a lot of overlap in, I think, what they believe. So it was always kind of a little strange to see them feuding because like they sort of are on the same end of the like MAGA sphere, and they're on the, I want to say the fringes, but they have very radical views on these things. So I think that's one, but I also think he knows that people are going to talk about it. And Tucker really likes the attention. He likes poking the eyes of other people and getting people to be outraged at him. And this is another way to do that. And I even hesitate to talk about Tucker because I think he feeds off of the attention. The problem is that he is wielding a lot of influence over the MAGA movement, and particularly, I think, over young men. And, during this interview, and I think we have the clip we can play, but well, actually, let's listen to it. It's Nick Fuentes talking about how he was radicalized on race by Mark Levin.
You listen to Mark Levin every day?
In high school, yes.
Wow.
I was a fan. I loved his show. And I actually liked how he was kind of obnoxious and mean to his callers.
Yeah.
Vicious. And I liked that. I thought that was funny. But I'll never forget one show. He goes live and he says, "America's becoming a majority non-white country. Does anybody think that's a good idea?" And I was thinking to myself, yeah, that actually doesn't sound so good. I didn't really even think that America's becoming majority minority like that. And,
Wait, so you were radicalized on race by Mark Levin?
yes,
Are you making that up? Or that's
that's a real story.
I think what's worrisome here is that a lot of young men like Nick Fuentes 10 years ago were listening to Tucker Carlson, are listening to Tucker Carlson today, and they're hearing Nick Fuentes and Tucker traffic in these anti-immigrant views, and they're being exposed to them. And if someone like Nick Fuentes can become, so radicalized by listening to Mark Levin, who is considered to be a pretty mainstream conservative media personality, imagine what the new generation is going to look like when they've grown up listening to Tucker Carlson and are now being exposed to the likes of Nick Fuentes.
Right. It feels like the fringe has gone even more to the fringe over time. It kind of reminds me of this scandal that broke out that Politico reported these text messages among young Republicans in particular, in which they were not so subtly either outright praising Hitler or expressing really, hateful views on immigrants, Black people. Pretty much anybody who is not like a white Christian. And where does that even come from, right? Like, where did they become so radical or so extreme on these views? And like, it's a reflection of where they're getting their information. They're hanging out in these spaces. And by Tucker, who is very mainstream, right? Like he's a name that like our parents know, that 70-year-olds who go and pull the lever to actually vote know who Tucker Carlson is. And they are like, he's like a good guy, bad guy, whatever you view, but they know him. And so if you tune into this show, which is on YouTube and big platforms, you're going to get now with Nick Fuentes, this softball, chummy chat interview in which this guy who has, actively promoted the idea that Jews who died in the Holocaust were like cookies in an oven. But a very soft interview where you're like, oh, that doesn't seem like a bad guy. Like, he seems pretty nice. Wow, maybe I'll subscribe to his show too. And it's the express lane down the rabbit hole, further into this extremist world where you do find people now who are young and listening to this stuff, espousing it as if it's, just everyday commonality views, right? You would never be able to turn on your television set or your radio and hear this sort of thing. And now here we have it, and it's right before our eyes, and Tucker seems to be okay with dancing even further into the fringes of anti-Semitic and Holocaust denial.
Yeah, and I think that's why, it was really interesting because to some extent there is still some resistance to this on the right. And so you saw this week Dinesh D'Souza, who, that man is all MAGA, right? He was the guy behind the 2000 Mules conspiracy theory film promoting election denialism. His MAGA credentials are as good as anyone. But he even came out and he posted online these messages he got from Charlie Kirk from, I guess, a few years ago when Dinesh D'Souza decided to debate Nick Fuentes. And the messages from Charlie Kirk were he was outraged. He was like, this guy is vermin, is what Charlie Kirk called Nick Fuentes. He says, we've been fighting this guy for so long. And even by debating him, you are bringing him up. You are lifting him up. This is the best thing that could have happened to him. And so one must wonder, what would Charlie Kirk think about Tucker Carlson debate or hosting this chummy chat with Nick Fuentes? Even Charlie Kirk, who had extreme views, was not touching Nick Fuentes.
No, it's actually remarkable to see because, as you note, Dinesh D'Souza isn't exactly your Bush neocon conservative. So the fact that even he's pushed back. But if you look at the comments and people who are reacting to Dinesh too, there's a lot of people who agree with him and think that like this was, sort of touching the third rail here, that Tucker embracing, which is, it's really hard to see it any other way, a figure that's so far. But to me, I get the view from this that Tucker views Nick Fuentes as somebody now who's grown in effectively in power in the space, and he has to contend with it. And I think that if you look at the constant trajectory of where this is all going in the far right media space, it continues to get more extreme over time. It is not moderating itself. It is not pulling back. And there are a few voices like Ben Shapiro who are not going that direction.
Well, They are even being dragged right to the right. Like Ben Shapiro was never, never, never Trump. And this last election cycle, he hosted a Trump fundraiser. And so I think even Ben Shapiro is being dragged to the right. And to your point, you think about the rhetoric when Donald Trump first came on stage and insulted John McCain, that prompted a fair amount of criticism on the right. Like, you don't insult someone's war record, right? He was in the military, he was captured. You do not insult that. Now, I think if Donald Trump made that remark, I doubt anyone on the right would criticize that. When Tucker Carlson first hosted Marjorie Taylor Greene on his show, that was touching the third rail, and there was some resistance to it. And over time, that just broke down. And now Marjorie Taylor Greene is a huge MAGA celebrity and can go on whatever podcast or right-wing show she wants. And so I think Tucker has always been at the forefront of touching that third rail. And there's always been some resistance, I guess, to it. And now you're seeing it with Dinesh D'Souza and others criticizing him for hosting Nick Fuentes. But ultimately, I think, 3 or 4 years down the line, I would bet that Nick Fuentes is pretty broadly accepted by a good chunk of the MAGA base. And we should also note, too, that he dined with Donald Trump, remember, a couple of years ago. And so he is someone who is wielding, I think, significant power now inside MAGA world.
Right. I mean, Fuentes addressed that on the Tucker show, how he dined with Kanye West and Donald Trump and sort of painted it as this pretty serene scene. But, Trump and Kanye, especially Trump, he took a lot of criticism for, embracing Nick Fuentes. But since that time, he's only grown even more powerful with an even larger audience. And I think that makes him a force to be reckoned with. And I think that if you are Tucker Carlson, who's one of the biggest figures in the right-wing media space, or if you're a lawmaker, politician who wants to make a mark for himself, you're looking at him and you're like, it'd be great to have his audience. It'd be great to have his, let's say, very engaged MAGA young guys on my side. And I suspect that is what's actually pulling them even farther to the right here, is like, that's where the energy of young people is. And it's not a great sign for where this is all maybe headed. I mean, these are people who are effectively openly embracing fascist concepts or Christian national, this infusement of an extreme religion and government tie-up, which of course is, completely antithetical to the whole reason the United States exists.
By the way, this also raises a question, I think, for like the mainstream outlets, like CNN or CBS News, that they want to host, people on the right. And like this week, for instance, Abby Phillip, who has a new book out, is doing a media tour, and she's been asked about why she brings on dishonest MAGA personalities, most notably Scott Jennings, on her show when she herself has called him a liar. Recently actually, and knows likely that he is not, he's not someone who's a truth teller, right? And she's been saying, well, it's important to hear the other side and engage with the other side and talk to those people and understand what they think. The problem, of course, becomes, well, if the other side is increasingly more and more radical and dishonest, how do you engage with that, right? And I think that's a challenge. If Nick Fuentes, and she said, she was asked by Tim Miller, would you bring on Nick Fuentes? And she said no. Would you bring on Candace Owens? And she said no. And I actually thought at that point, her argument of why you need to hear the other side started to fall apart, because it's like certain people right now, I guess, are considered too extreme to bring on. But, Jillian Michaels, who she had on, was saying some pretty extreme stuff that's been accepted by a large chunk of the conservative movement. And like, where do you draw that line? And how much, how do you treat these people as the Republican Party, becomes more and more radicalized? I think that's a really tough one for networks like CNN and CBS, and I think NBC and ABC would be fair to put in there, that want to, hear both sides, but one side is becoming pretty extreme. What do you do?
Yeah, this is why you just don't wade into that space at all. You just stick to the facts. We just do the news. We cover the news, and people who live in reality are the ones you pay to come on and be your analysts, people who exist in the real world, rather than even both sizing an issue like what we're talking about. Like, sure, there are Americans, and a substantial chunk now who believe this stuff. But what are we going to both sides, that we should be denying the Holocaust or that, Jews are cookies? Like, what are we talking about?
Thank you for watching Power Lines. For more analysis and insight, subscribe to our YouTube channel down below, like this video, and you can watch more of us right over here.